Hi guys, it's the end of January, so you know what that means. It is January wrap-up time, book journal edition. January feels so long, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because like other months have like 31 days. Maybe it's just because February comes right after it, which feels so short because it only has 29. I genuinely don't know what it is, but like it's the end of January and it just feels like it's been here for like a million months. Anywho, like we're here to talk about today, it is January book journal time, and it's a little bit bright, but that's just January, and you'll see in the journal. People were interested in seeing like how I make my individual journal spreads, just how I update my book journal in general. I usually film on my phone vertically. I usually post some like reels to Instagram about how I do the process. And so very recently, considering that I've been using Procreate for like a year and some change now, you would think that like I would have realized this sooner. But there's a time-lapse feature, tracks like basically all of your movement in Procreate and like can export it into a video. So that's what I'm going to be showing you guys today, while I'm going to be like talking over it, or just about like my thoughts about the books, why I rated them the way I did. And so definitely let me know if you guys like this way. So without further ado, let's journal and talk about the books that I read in January. This is my January bookshelf where I place all of the books that I read and all the recording star ratings. I read 3 books and DNF'd 1 this month. Because the other pages are going to get their own individual pages, I'm just going to talk about the breakup tour right now. I've never read any of the adult romances by this author duo until now, but I did read one of their YA romances a while back, and I really enjoyed it, so I remember parts of it distinctly, and I just don't remember the writing in that book sounding nearly as like awkward as it did in this one. The writing was often lyrical and poetic in a way I knew was supposed to feel heartfelt, but it just came off as kind of clunky, and so it'd be in these really emotional moments where I knew I was supposed to feel deeply for the characters, but instead I was just really distracted by the word choice more often than not. And this is my playlist of the month where I list the 3 songs that I feel like I just listen to a lot. As you'll see, it's kind of all over the board. I very much listen across genres. When I first heard Born to Be, it just felt like it was on the less memorable side, but over the course of the month, the chorus just became so addicting, and I also just love the choreography of the performances. I found myself like back in my Lemonade Mouth era, and I could not stop listening to like the last verse of She's So Gone. You would think I'd been through some like devastating heartbreak. And last, Baby by Me, this song has been all over TikTok, and it's just such an earworm. Now this is my genre tracker. Please ignore for a minute that I thought I read 4 books and not 3 this month. My friend and I were desperately racking our brains for me to figure out a way where I could like list subgenres within this. So we thought it best to write them within the little boxes. And I feel like this is just nice for my brain, for organization's sake, because for example, when I was just filling them all in pink, it felt like I was only labeling them like contemporary romance. But now since I'm filling in the boxes with the words, I know like, oh, this is contemporary versus paranormal versus like romantasy. The first book I read was a manhwa version of the book The Bromance Book Club. At first I didn't realize that this was like a collaboration with the original, and so at first when I read the synopsis and saw how similar things were, considering I'd already read that book before, I was like, this is feeling a little bit too on the nose. Then I realized and I was like, oh, let me take a look. The Bromance Book Club is a second chance romance like Marriage in Trouble. The manhwa goes, as is the book, Gavin, a star baseball player, learns that his wife Thea has been like faking orgasms with him their whole relationship. He reacts really poorly to this information, and Thea is like, that's my last straw, like I'm done. Our marriage is over. He's a wreck and like desperate to win her back, and so his teammates as well as like other star players amongst other sports come to him with news that they're all a part of like a book club that reads romances to like keep the romance alive in their life with like their own significant others. I feel like this concept is very like fun and whimsical as long as you don't think too deeply about it, because while there are moments of seriousness like Garrett and Thea's like failing marriage, the concept of the book club is just like so deeply unserious to me. I had fun reading this. There were no surprises. As I said, I already read this book like 2-ish, maybe like a year and a half ago, and my opinion of the work hasn't really changed since then. My like dislike of like the execution of the second chance romance trope like really flip-flops, so one thing I usually do love is when a husband is trying to win his wife back, and I did here as well. Over the course of the manhwa, we see Thea and Garrett find their way back to each other, of course with the help of like Garrett's buddies. And the pretty art of the manhwa, even though I'd already read this story before, it did add an element of like fun and excitement. And I don't know if this collaboration is like a one-off thing, but I do really hope that more romance books like tap into doing this. I thought the side characters were fun, and I liked Garrett and Thea as a couple, but I just found myself kind of bored by the end of this book, which is why I gave it a 3-star rating. I just felt like by the time that Garrett and Thea were finding their way back to each other, and I knew we were ramping up for some kind of like third act breakup or like conflict or climax, I just felt kind of like lackluster about the whole thing. And so for its enjoyment, I feel like a 3-star rating felt fitting. Reading this also reminded me that I never attempted to read the other books in the series. I don't know why, but for some reason, the concept of the book club felt very one and done to me, and so even though I know it's a series, I can't imagine the other characters getting their own books. But I wouldn't discount them, and so I will add them to my growing TBR shelf. Then I received an arc of Briad by Ali Hazelwood. The only Ali Hazelwood book I've read before is The Love Hypothesis, and I had mixed opinions about it. I remember enjoying most of it, but just like not liking the third act of the book like at all. And after every book I saw that was published, it kind of felt like, oh, okay, these are like the same books in different fonts, which I can read sometimes, but I was like, I just don't think this is my shtick. So going into Briad by Ali Hazelwood, I really didn't know what to expect, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I feel like what I enjoyed most in The Love Hypothesis, like Ali Hazelwood's writing, definitely carried over here. So Misery is the daughter of one of the most powerful vampire councilmen. She's been living amongst the humans anonymously until she's called back to be like a part of this like marriage of convenience, like political alliance with the Wares. And so for her own reasons, she agrees to the marriage with like the powerful alpha werewolf Lo, and things ensue. I feel like a broken record when I say this, but this is truly for the girls who like never left their Teen Wolf era. I just had a lot of fun reading this, and especially really liked how the world building was set up. I don't think it's necessarily overdramatic to say like I kind of forgot until the middle of the book that I was like, oh, this is like a romance. This isn't just like a paranormal like fiction, because Ali Hazelwood is very intentional from the beginning about like really establishing you in this world where humans and werewolves and vampires try to live amongst each other. It's not a requirement for me to like a main character to enjoy a book, but Misery was a character who I just really enjoyed like being in her head and like following along with her. I feel like sometimes I'm overly critical of characters who it feels like make the worst decisions when they're in really tumultuous situations, with the understanding that like, yes, of course I'd probably be acting crazy too if I was in something like that, but I appreciated it even though Misery was like in a very like precarious situation. She's not making decisions that leave you wondering like, okay, this feels like just conflict for the sake of conflict in the book. And when it comes to Ali Hazelwood's writing, like I was saying before, I feel like she knows how to write dirty talk. My friend and I were talking about how there can be like nothing more awkward or like bad than like when you're reading a scene with like spice and it's very clear that like things just feel very awkward, very clinical. That is not a problem in this book. Lo and Misery have a lot of great chemistry. I feel like the one thing that's really stopping me from giving this book a 5 is something I realized recently, which is that I like this archetype of male hero, which is why I'm usually never critical of it really. But the selfless to a fault kind of seems like too good to be true. They put everybody before themselves can kind of lead to being a flat character, and that is what Lo kind of came off at times. This didn't hinder my enjoyment, but I do find that like when that's the fatal flaw, it just leaves me wanting a little bit more from the character. And I did write my thoughts on the little speech bubble on this page, but I took them away because I feel like there were too many spoilers. And I read Confessions of an Alleged Good Girl, which follows Monique. She's the pastor's daughter. They feel like there are very clear lanes for her life. The one person she feels like she can really be herself with is her boyfriend Dom, who she's also been trying to have sex with. But after the 20th plus time, to no avail, he breaks up with her. And so she starts a rocky journey trying to learn about her body. Overall, just kind of discover who she is outside of that relationship and other people's expectations. And also on this journey with her is Sasha, the quote-unquote church girl she had preconceived notions about, and Reggie, the quote-unquote bad boy who's currently under her father's wing. Relatability definitely isn't the only thing that makes a good story, but it is definitely nice to feel like you can see yourself in a book. I definitely related a lot to how Monique's struggle with the idea of who people perceive you as can definitely start to like hinder who you're trying to become. And while I've read YA books that tackle sex positivity, the concept of virginity, it was just really refreshing to read it from a young black girl's perspective and to discuss the topic of vaginismus. And I realized I didn't touch on it in my reading vlog, but I thought the romance between Monique and Reggie was very sweet. And I liked Monique and Sasha's budding friendship, especially when Monique astutely recognized that sometimes the things that you may not seem to like about another person is maybe just like a projection on your part. I gave this book a 3.5 star rating because I feel like while I enjoyed it for the most part, the ending kind of lost me a bit, which is to say that I found the third act rushed, and like a couple of the storylines that had been like set up and established, I feel like wrapped up a bit too quickly. It's not at all that I felt conflicts were solved too easily, but I feel like especially when it came to like the tense and tumultuous relationship with Monique and her mother, Monique and her father, that whole dynamic, I would have liked a little bit more discussion from that. I guess the understanding is that it leaves us off in a place where they're going to try to like navigate a new path, but I would have liked to see a bit more on page. And this is just me filling out my yearly digital bookshelf with the books that I read. I don't really think there's much to say here, but I try to replicate the covers of the books as much as possible to put them on the spines here. More often than not, I look online to find a font that looks as close to the font that was used on the cover, and then I import it into Procreate. But sometimes, especially when the title is one word, I usually just copy it over from my journal page and then put it here. So you'll see that here where I found fonts for the Bromance Book Club and Confessions of an Alleged Good Girl, but for Briad, I just copy and pasted the title that I drew on my journal page. Sounded probably louder on camera than it actually was. But that is it for the books I read in January and my book journal update. If you guys have any thoughts, questions, if you have any, you've read any of these books and you want to like chat about them already, drop them in the comments. I just love talking with people in the comments of the videos. I love to chat, so